as I said, I'm going to read, or a lot of the focus of this reading is going to be me reading what I write about writing, and that includes living the writer's life. And the very first poem I'm going to read is, I wrote it early on in my writing career. That was a long time ago. I was in my early 30s, and I didn't really know much from poetry. You know, I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to write poetry. So every once in a while, I wrote what I now consider a good poem, but I also wrote what I now consider to be not good poems that I've now, most of them revised into good poems. But anyway, this was. I don't think I changed a word of this. And when I met John, he decided to publish a little chapbook of my poems. So that's what this is. It's called Surviving the App.
By the way, there's a knitting group that's meeting here. So
Oh, okay.
they might be kind of loud, so you may need to.
Oh, okay. Well, you could come to at least sit on the second row instead of the third row. But I do know that the back row students are often the ones that pay the most attention.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're often the ones that are the most responsive, So it's just the ambience, I guess, that they feel. Anyway, so this is called Daughter of Culture. And my parents were cultured, but in ways that sometimes made me feel left out. I wanted them to love me more than they loved Beethoven or Karl Marx, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what this poem's about, and it ends up being about writing. And this is way before I published, It's called Daughter of Culture. Down all the long white hallways and around all the slippery corners and behind the layers of glass and under the perfectly folded blankets, I lay weeping and screaming, O mother, while you propped yourself up in bed to converse with the learned doctor. Not about me, mother, not about the meaning of baby me, but about the meaning of Balzac, Kafka, and Henry James. In the home you brought me to, my pictures got tacked onto bulletin boards or dripped dry and wet on cellar walls, while Chagall floated over the kitchen table. And Van Gogh, 3 feet by 4, meditated over the well-dusted piano. You hushed my improvising and smiled resigned at my sonatinas, and whatever I arrived home from, Beethoven from your instruments greeted me on the porch stairs long before you did. 20 years later, my poems flutter in your bottom drawers or suffocate in photograph albums, while Emily Dickinson poses on the front bookcase. Pablo Neruda rests thick and soft by your bedside, and Virginia Woolf stares into your bedroom, surrounded by wide mat and gold frame. Mother, oh mother, someday I swear I will get my poems between hard covers. I will get introductions for my poems. I will get reviews for my poems, so that you will put me on your walls and shelves, so that you will put me where you eat and sleep, so that if ever I do crawl back into your womb, if ever you do get to give birth to me again, you will pack me in your suitcase and keep me by your bedside. So this time you and your learned doctor will watch and discuss me. So that was one of my, and I'm going to grab a chair, put things there. Thank you. So that was one of my motivations, but only one. Love it. It's not the only reason. It's not the only reason I write. Hello. Coming for the reading? You here for the reading? Poetry reading? Oh, okay. Well, that's what we're doing. One reason I write is, I learned when I first started really coming out as a writer and joining other writers and reading and sharing my stuff is what I mean to say. But through a women's poetry workshop at University of Pennsylvania. They had a women's school, free women's school they called it. And someone named Barbara Ruth was doing this workshop. In the workshop, one of the things I was writing about was motherhood. At the time, I had 2 children. I later had 2, more, and they were ages 6 and 2. And I felt, as a feminist, I felt that mothers had kind of a raw deal in society. I still do, but it was probably possibly more true then. And I wrote what I wrote poems about having to do with being a mother. And some of them were what I called the politics of motherhood, in which I expressed my belief that mothers constitute an oppressed class. The same way that women and blacks and gays and so on constitute an oppressed class. And so I read some of the readings at the workshop, and I found that it was helpful to some of the people in the workshop who were mothers, or maybe not mothers, and it was stuff that had not been written before. I realized that, and I had not realized that before. So I realized that my writing could benefit others, and I wasn't only writing for myself. I didn't have to write only for myself. And so that's another reason I write. And since then, as there have been 2 other occasions, 2 other communities which really do need my writing, and some people realize and some don't. One is I have written, not so much anymore, about the 2 tragedies in my life. One is pregnancy loss, a newborn, and one is spousal chronic illness. My first husband had multiple sclerosis. Well, some people know this. Had multiple sclerosis. He was diagnosed with that, and we went through the 26-year odyssey with that, the whole family. But when I wrote about pregnancy loss, I said things that other people had not said. And I expressed, for one thing I said that was helpful to some people was that I was in a big hurry to get pregnant again and have another baby, and I didn't need to work things through. I wanted, and a lot of therapists and psychiatrists really just should wait, and so no, I'm not going to wait. Things like that. Other stuff too, and with the spousal chronic illness, I can't go into it too much, although I will a little bit later. But there are spouses who need more writing than what is already available, and they know it. They need what I write, and others feel differently. People come from different. So I write because I feel that some of my writing anyway, is important in this world. It's not true with. I write a lot of personal stuff too, like Katie, you were saying you write, a lot of political stuff, and I do too. But that's not all I write. I write what I feel like writing. We were saying, yes. Do we feel like doing? Okay, so I'm just saying that there are many reasons why I write. But here's another writing poem. Okay, so I started talking about my first husband's chronic illness, and this is a book that came out in 2009, I think. It's called Chronic Progressive, so it's kind of self-explanatory. There's this poem in this book called Writing as a Disability. So my writing about that odyssey is about me. I'm not writing about my first husband and how I am to that too, because that's part of it. That's part of the picture. But I'm writing about how I feel, and not necessarily about how I should feel, but how I should feel. I was very protective of myself and my children, of the people around this. It's a big issue, so I'm not going to convert anybody to some of my beliefs today, but I'm going to read this poem called Writing as a Disability. If he can have chronic progressive incurable MS, I can have chronic progressive incurable books. Every time he needs another jar, I need another book. Every time he needs a bedpan, I need 2 new books. And when he needs scratched the top left part of the inside of his right nostril, or when something is caught between the 2 gold teeth, bottom left back, or when the home health aide doesn't show, I need exacerbating books. And when he calls Mar, I need a book signing. Dr. Marion Cohen, I sign, or just plain Marion, or maybe Mar in quotes. In other words, it's not the books I need, but the author, or the name of the author. My chronic, progressive, incurable, exacerbating name. Another reason I write. Reasons for writing keep cropping up. That's a good title for a book, Reasons for Writing.
Uh-huh.
Well, this is just a plain old writing. Well, it's more than that. It's how I felt, but it's about writing, and it's called A Writer's Little Nightmare. But this really happened. My pen just ran out of ink, so I pick up a pencil. But the pencil also has run out of something. Any object can get tired of being what it is. All right, well, that's it for that book for now. Now for lights. Star of our
Hold
show.
on, I get a photo. I'm doing my social media job.
Those glasses.
On Etsy, I've seen things like this, and some people are selling them for like $30.
All right. How'd I come out in there? How'd I come out in that? Good enough?
Good, I'll show you when you're done.
All right. So lights are about lights, really. Is about lights, and it's also about things that are light-like. Okay? I don't know if other people do this, but wake up in the middle of the night since I was a kid and see a certain light and wonder where it came from, and I have to stare at it all night long. When I was a kid, I would actually do this. Now I don't stare at it all night long, but so my first memory has to do with lights. A light. It's just called earliest memory. I was not 2 yet, and I've always remembered this ever since it happened. So it's two parts. One is called the persistent all-over light. Why was the crib in the middle of the room? How many were putting me in for my nap? And why weren't they turning off the light? But it already is off, they answered. Off, off, I repeated. But it is off. What was this persistent all-over light? Where was the only switch that could turn it off? Was it down the cellar or up in the sky? Off, off, I said once again. Please turn it off. 2. What happened next? Something was raised a notch, and I emerged. I was born. I couldn't get unborn. The light had been there all along, and if it wasn't the kind of light that could disappear, it was its own origin. It came with the air. Finally, I stopped asking my adults to turn it off. Very tired from waking up, I must have finally slept. And this is the poem that actually started my idea of writing a book about lights I have loved. And I wrote this poem right around the time, I think I read it at that reading that I met you at, E. And I thought, oh, I'll send her a book having to do with lights, you know. And this is the poem kind of that started it. It's called A Curious Light. In the bedroom at night, way up on the left wall, there is a curious light. It's a large vertical rectangle with a hole. One night I kept looking at it. I knew what caused the hole, the large lamp just at the window, but I didn't know what caused the light, what made it go on and off. Regularly, I counted 29 seconds on, 39 seconds off. So no, not a passing car and not a parked car, nothing from the church across the street. I stood up and went to the window. I traced it to the traffic light. As it flicked, green versus yellow versus red, so did the light on my wall. Red doesn't make that light. Yellow doesn't make that light. Only very bright green. But it doesn't end up green. Not on the wall. It ends up regular, the color of colorless light. Thing is, I've slept in this room over 30 years. I often wake up and see that light. Always assumed it usually wasn't there. Now I kind of love that light. One of the things I love is I've gotten to know it. Another thing is I know I don't have to look at it. As I fall asleep, I can keep my eyes closed. If I wake up, I love to lie there and wonder whether, when I open my eyes, it will be there. If it's there, for how much longer? If not there, will it be almost there? Almost there. Which of those 39 seconds is it? Here's a poem. It's not about lights. It's about light-like things, I suppose. And I'm glad I'm reading it now because I'm reading it for you, Katie. It's called Dreams About Torture. It's always things that would not really hurt. There's rawness but no blood, moans but no screams, and definitely no marks, never anything gross. And when I'm the one being tortured, I'm also the one doing the torturing. I'm at the controls in some way. And if the dream turns lucid, I approach everybody in sight and begin to mold their faces. I stretch, I shrink, I permute, but I don't torture. Once in such a dream, I said, I know you aren't real, so I can torture you if I want to, but I don't want to. Besides, maybe you are real. Yes, I'm still afraid it would hurt them more than it hurts me. Does everyone here know what a lucid dream is? Okay, good. All right. This is about writing, The Pretty Homeless Woman on 22nd Street. Every evening when the lights go out, she does what I do, digs under the blanket, pulls out a notebook, props up on her left elbow. We close our eyes and we write in the dark, which means we write big, the letters full and round, the words far apart. And our right elbows squirm, equal and opposite to the points of our pens. They write mirror image, they write thick, they write unseen in the fuzzy, sparkly air. All right, this is for Katie too. It's about teaching. It's called Teaching Observation. I don't know if you get observed when you teach. I sometimes get observed, or I did at this writing at this time. The person who was observing it, meant as a criticism, said, "You spent 20 minutes telling you how wonderful it all is." And I thought that would be good to do. I still think it's good to do. I got it all in. I'm very good, actually, at finishing the syllabus. But it's that's not what the observer said. We went on and on about how wonderful it all is. Anyway, this poem is called Teaching Observation. I'm sorry. It is wonderful how we can get around both the vertical line rule and the horizontal. I have to say that this is math. I don't know if I mentioned to you two that math is really like my first passion before writing. So I have my degrees are in math and so on. And I'm still passionate about math. So let me start reading the poem again, Teaching Observation. I'm sorry. It is wonderful how we can get around both the vertical line rule and the horizontal line rule. How the curve can flower, spiral, and cross itself again and again. How we can now make any pretty picture we want. Yes, it is all very wonderful, but okay, I promise I won't ever again waste so much time. And thank you for letting me in on the big secret, how to get through the syllabus, by not telling them how wonderful it all is. That's the whole point of anything, I think. All right, this is the book of math poems, of poems about my passion for math. I wrote it while I was in the throes of working on a math problem, which I did eventually solve. It was a difficult problem. It took 6 months to solve. And so I'm reading those poems that are more about writing. This poem, I think, is a little bit about writing, the one I'm about to read. They're all untitled. Points were blinking. Well, can people hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I sure can hear them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, and John with the thing there, and, you might have trouble.
Well, he has like an extra mic on.
He knows how to do it.
Yeah.
He knows how to do it, I know that. Okay, anyway, this is the first poem in the book. It's what it feels like when you get an idea, and the idea is still at the beginning of the idea, and but it's gripped you already. You're already hooked. Okay, points were blinking, lines were beckoning. How was I to know? What could I have done? I heard some voices. I had some time. There was a tenderness. There was a weeping. How was I to know the points would not point? How was I to know the lines would not line up? I tell my students that the feeling of working on math is like the feeling of working on riddles or puzzles. The feeling is pretty much the same. Math is different. It's more general. And that's one thing about it. It's different.
Feel.
When you work on a puzzle, yeah.
No, math.
Oh, you feel that when you do math, or you feel that when you?
Yeah.
It is like it is like a puzzle. Some of them are very, 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 very difficult, more difficult than say a puzzle might be, but the feeling is very much the same. Okay, here is a poem about writing, more about writing than about math actually, but I think both. well, most of the poems in here are untitled, but some of them I sort of give titles to anyway by putting them in parentheses. It's the mood I was in, so I'll just read it. Nightmare that we write in a language in which every shape is a letter. So, we can't doodle, can't cross out, can't make any stray mark. It's like trying to throw out a trash can, or cry wolf, or leave a phone message when the machine is full. You catch the first line, a language in which every shape is a letter. I actually had that dream. All right, that's what I was going to read. Okay, dream about trying to unload a gun. Mechanics never was my forte. I'm a theoretical mathematician. I try this compartment, that, but nothing clicks open, nothing even shifts. Finally, I hear a muffled sound, but they drop out slowly, tantalizingly, and not far enough away. And maybe I left one in by mistake. I keep shaking, jiggling. They're like salt from the shaker or glass on the floor from a broken bowl. I'm scared enough to keep jiggling, to stay in that little room. And I stay scared until nothing. I'm still scared. I actually had that dream. All right. Unlike many writers, I think, and many creative people, when I look at things that I wrote back in 7th grade or 9th grade or college, yes, I might cringe, but I keep it. You know, I know especially with me, I think it's my style that there usually is something in it that I can salvage. So one of my early diaries, I think it was my 7th grade diary, I cringed after a while when I started to mature, and I would read what I wrote in there. But I I kept it. I still have it, and I wrote a sign on it. And that's in the poem. So you'll see what the sign said. And in math, there are things called lemmas. They're not theorems. They're not the main theorem, but they're things that you need to prove they lead up to the theorem. And often the lemma is used only for that theorem. So that's why they're called lemmas. Sometimes the lemmas wind up being used for other theorems and by other, mathematical writers. But they're little theorems kind of. So I save unused lemmas, no matter how silly. Just like I saved my old diary. I was 14 and outgrew it, but I would not divorce it. I would not banish it. I certainly would not kill it. Instead, I put a sign on it. Never throw this away. Never throw this away. Have you thrown anything away, Katie? You do the same thing, right? Or Beryl? Thrown any of your writing away? All right. One of the things about math research, and it's also about puzzles, is that you reach the point of no return, right? Where you can't stop. And I've lain awake whole nights thinking about math, trying to prove a math theorem, or, well, not so much puzzles, but either, So it's about not, that kind of thing. And when I was working on that problem, it occurred to me that I had this memory. It reminded me of something that happened at age around 4. So it's called Math Research Age 4, because in my own way I was doing math research, emotionally. In this poem, what happened. One day I set out through the Queen Anne's lace. There was no end to it. After a while, the grass got sharp, and the white field became like outer space. Later still it rained, slobbering the sharp, wet grass against my legs. Destination faded into rumor, and so did home. I was stranded in the middle. But I was not lost. The way back was the straight line before me. I was only stuck on the straight. That's wrong. But I was not lost. The way back was the straight line behind me. I was only stuck on the straight line before me. I knew the way back. It was the will I couldn't find. And something else. It's called The Dead Book. So when you publish a book and the books arrive, you know, whatever many copies you get, either they're free or they're not free depending on the publisher. Well, the box doesn't come with customers to buy the book, and it doesn't come with reviewers to review the book, and it doesn't come with poetry reading coordinators to give you a reading, you know. And there you are with your book. So the feel, and actually this reflects what I was saying, my experience of my first husband, his chronic illness, multiple sclerosis. So it reflects my having had that experience, as you'll see in the first line. It's called The Dead Book. It's not dead. It's sick, chronically sick, paralyzed. It doesn't read itself. It doesn't promote itself. She feeds it, dresses it, puts it to bed at night. She does range of motion on it, everything 20 times. It's had its arrival, and that's that. They sit in the house and stare at each other. She shouldn't be left alone with it, but she is. Tooth pain, there's nothing wrong with the tooth, you know. It can cause intense, it affects the same nerves, and it can wake you at night, and it wakes you up suddenly. So I was waking up eventually I was waking up every 2 hours at night, and it takes time for that to pass, you know, meaning a month or more than a month actually. So, sinus nights. Inside the dream I hear the nerve approaching. Hurry, hurry, get out of the dream. When it catches me, I have arrived outside of the dream. So I can shake my head. Stand up, drink some water. Meet the nerve on my own territory, have a fighting chance. Inside another dream, I don't get out in time. The nerve has caught me just inside the dream. One time the way into sleep is not sudden. Something keeps alternating with something else. Another time I exit sleep in time, but it happens anyway. The nerve has been waiting for me outside the dream. Maybe tonight it won't happen, but it does. I am afraid the nerve will catch me in the very center of the dream. A plan for recovery. Nerves don't go away so fast. Nerves are a whole other deal. Poor new little nerve, having to exist too vibrantly. How about you step outside my body? I'll put you in a tiny padded box, the kind made for an engagement ring. I could keep you as my pet worm. I'll water you, give you plenty of air, Klonopin, Neurontin, anything your little heart could possibly desire. Only please just stay outside my body. You can rage, roar, sizzle, tap, as often and as long as you please. Then when you've calmed down and are ready to listen to reason, you can climb back inside. And when the thing was finally over, I wrote this poem called Sleep. You know, it's after the long illness, which precluded uninterrupted sleep. I have a new toy. Well, an old toy returned. I play with it all night, play with it all day. Play it with dreams, play it without dreams. I try it all different ways. This toy is both an ordinary doll, merely pretty, and an action figure. Look at what it can do. I carry it in my pocket. I keep reaching in, make sure it's still there. And who gave me this toy? Whoever it was who took and could again take it away. God, I don't believe that. Okay, this is called, is it 1:15 already? Oh, it is. All right, well, I am close to the end of reading. Okay, what I'm going to do then is, read fewer poems than I thought I would. But this poem is called Recovery. Like an oppressed, thanks Marilyn. Like an oppressed, I thank the oppressor. I thank my body for letting the hurt stop, for admitting me back to the land of the non-tortured, even if much later than sooner. I thank my body and will reward it by buying it more clothes at my favorite thrift store. Yes, I thank my body for being a body that I can enjoy dressing up, for being my high school height and close enough to my high school weight. I thank most of my hairs for staying reddish brown, My mouth and vocal cords for outgrowing stuttering. My nose, for being aquiline, and my cheekbones for being high. I thank my body for its energy, and I thank my brain for all those passions. I thank it all for staying alive so far. Thank you, I say, humbly, perhaps more humbly than I should. All right, this is my latest memoir. I have two memoirs. One is not with me because I don't have enough copies, but and also because I'm not reading from it. One is called Dirty Details. It's the at-home caregiving memoir. Okay. And this is the nursing home. It's called Still the End, Memoir of a Nursing Home Wife. And here's I'm going to read the part where that explains why it has that title. If you don't already know, actually, why it has that title. It goes on and on. That odyssey went on for, like I say, 26 years. He lived for 26 years after diagnosis. And there was a lot of odyssey going on, a lot of big journey, you know. So I think I've already said, you know, he had MS. It really progressed, you know, after a while, and he was you know, almost essentially completely paralyzed, not above the neck, not paralyzed below the neck. And he was on a feeding tube, and he was on his last legs for a very, very long time because he wanted to be. He chose to be. He wanted, you know, what they call heroics. I did not want heroics, but it was his choice, you know. Anyway, so our youngest child at the time was almost 8. And he used to write stories, like way kids write stories, adventure stories, and so on. And he would dictate them to me. He wasn't yet reading. He was homeschooling, and he was allowed to not be reading, so he read when he was ready, which was age 9. And then he read, you know, really well. But so he was a writer, and he still is, and now he's 29 years old. But we would have, while he was reading me the stories, and while he was dictating the stories to me, is what I'm saying, and I would write them down. So there is a few episodes about that described in this book, but here's the one that explains where the title comes, where Still the End comes from. 3/4 of the way into Devon's futuristic long story number 3, I could see that he was running out of ideas. You know, I told him, you don't have to wait till the end of the notebook to end the story. But then I'll have all these other pages, he answered. Oh, I see, you're worried about wasting the pages. Yeah. Well, you could just use them for another story, or for pictures. But Devon decided to use them to end the story. On the very next page, he wrote, the end. On the one after that, it's still the end. And then it's the end already. He kept thinking of variations on that for a total of 13 pages. It was a very long and chronic end, like his father's. Maybe Dev believed all ends had to be like that. All right, and I'm going to end, speaking of ends, I think I will, I don't have a lot of much, these are all short poems, so I can end with these. And they all have to do with writing, being a writer. This is called After the Reading, written, and these are all from the forthcoming book, yeah. This was written pretty early on, but then I've worked on it since then. After the Reading. Poets can't say, I think a lot about curious lights. They can only say, I write a lot about curious lights. Poets can share their poems, but that's the only thing they can share. And after the reading, when lights get brighter, chairs get closer, walls get wider, and people ask whether I made my dress or whether I think it'll snow soon, and in general act sort of relieved, I come significantly close to saying, you know those poems up there? Well, I meant them. This is called Before I Knew About Writing. Before I knew about writing, I knew about remembering. When I had an interesting thought, I knew it, in whatever language I knew. I carried my interesting thoughts all the way to age 11, when I learned about real writing, not only school compositions or cute rhyming birthday cards. I had steered my interesting thoughts safely to that shore. I finally had hard copies of what for so long had been too soft. Two short poems after a whole day typing. I don't think in words, I think in letters. Each sails out of my head in some parabolic arc towards its correct key. Meanwhile, another has begun. The paths intertwine, wires and circuits, till the keyboard has become another brain. I'm slowly transferring my thinking to another brain. And the last poem I'm reading is, I wrote it actually while I was in San Francisco. We were in San Francisco, and a friend of mine got me a reading in San Francisco, so I did a reading in San Francisco, and I had to decide, what am I going to read? I couldn't bring all my poems with me and decide the night before what I was going to read, because I wasn't home. So I brought some poems with me, the ones I figured I'd want to read. And that's what this poem is about, wishing that I could have brought all my poems with me. It's like clothes a little bit. I wish I could bring all my clothes with me, because I sometimes say, deciding what to wear, I'm big on clothes too, is another thing. Big on, clothes and thrift shopping. Anyway, this is called Poem for a San Francisco Reading. In camp, there was the family back home. In college, there was the boy back home. And here, now, at this vacation reading, there are the poems back home. There are also plenty of poems right here, and I've just written some more. But I still want to read, I still keep thinking about, I still kind of miss the poems back home.